Lisa thought she had everything figured out. For 12 years, she lived in a beautiful house on Oak Street with her husband Mike and their 3 daughters. The oldest, Rebecca, was 13 and loved painting. The middle daughter, Amy, was 11 and always had her nose in a book. Little Sophie was just 7 years old and still believed in fairy tales. Their house was the kind that neighbors admired when they walked by. White picket fence, rose bush in the front yard, and a tire swing hanging from the old oak tree. Mike worked at the insurance company downtown, and everyone knew him as the guy who never missed his kids' school plays or soccer games. Lisa spent her days volunteering at the local animal shelter and helping organize church fundraisers. Life felt perfect, almost too good to be true. And maybe it was everything started falling apart on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Lisa was making pancakes for breakfast when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm but serious. There had been an accident on Highway 9. A truck had run a red light. Mike didn't make it to the hospital. The next few weeks passed like a bad dream. People brought casseroles and flowers. The girls cried every night. Lisa tried to hold everyone together while planning a funeral she never thought she'd have to plan at 42 years old. The life insurance check would come soon, she told herself. They would be okay? They had to be okay, but when Lisa sat down with the bank manager 3 weeks later, her world turned upside down. Mike had been taking out loans. Big ones. The house had a second mortgage she didn't know about. There were credit cards maxed out to buy things she'd never seen. The life insurance money wouldn't even cover half of what they owed. How is this possible? Lisa asked, staring at papers covered in numbers that made no sense. Mike never spent money on anything. He drove a 10-year-old car. We shopped at discount stores. The bank manager, an older man with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Peterson, these charges are mostly from online gambling sites? Your husband had been doing this for about 3 years. Lisa felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Mike? Gambling? The man who counted change twice at the grocery store? The man who made them turn off lights when they left a room to save on electricity? She drove home in a daze, wondering how she was going to tell the girls that they might lose their house. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that Daddy had a secret problem that's going to change everything? That night, after the girls went to bed, Lisa sat at the kitchen table with all the bills spread out in front of her. The numbers were scary. Even if she got a job tomorrow, she couldn't make enough money to keep up with the payments. She'd never worked outside the home. Her only experience was volunteer work. The phone started ringing constantly. Bill collectors with robot voices asking for Mike, then asking for her when she explained he had passed away. Some were understanding, others were not. One man told her that being a widow didn't make the debt disappear. Lisa tried to get a job. At the grocery store, the pharmacy, even the fast food places. But she had no recent work experience, and jobs were hard to find in their small town. The few places that might have hired her couldn't pay enough to make a difference. Meanwhile, word was getting around town about their money troubles. Lisa started noticing how conversations stopped when she walked into the post office. At the grocery store, people she'd known for years suddenly seemed very busy when they saw her coming down the aisle. The worst part was how it affected the girls. Rebecca came home from school crying one day because her best friend's mom said she couldn't come over anymore. Amy's teacher asked if everything was okay at home because her grades were slipping. Little Sophie kept asking when Daddy was coming back, as if losing their house might somehow bring him home too. Lisa felt like she was drowning. Every day brought new problems. The electricity company sent a shut-off notice. The car needed repairs they couldn't afford. Rebecca needed new school shoes, but Lisa had already spent their last $20 on groceries. The neighbors who used to wave from their yards now looked the other way. The ladies from church still smiled, but the invitations to coffee dates and dinner parties stopped coming. Lisa realized that being poor made people uncomfortable. It was like they thought it might be contagious. 3 months after Mike died, the letter came from the bank. They had 60 days to catch up on payments, or the house would be foreclosed. Lisa stared at the official-looking paper with its legal words and deadlines. 60 days to come up with $12,000. It might as well have been 12 million. She called Mike's brother in California, swallowing her pride to ask for help. He was sympathetic but said business was slow and he had his own family to worry about. Her parents had passed away years ago. Mike's parents were in a nursing home and had no money to spare. Lisa started selling everything valuable they owned. Mike's golf clubs, her grandmother's china, even her wedding ring. It bought them a few more weeks, but it wasn't nearly enough. The girls knew something was very wrong. Rebecca, trying to be mature beyond her years, offered to get a job after school. Amy asked if they were going to be homeless like the people she'd seen on television. Sophie just held on to Lisa's leg whenever strangers came to the door, which happened more and more often as various companies sent people to collect on debts. Lisa lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone. So wrong, so fast. 6 months ago, her biggest worry was whether to plant tulips or daffodils in the spring garden. Now she was researching homeless shelters and food banks. The shame was almost worse than the fear. She'd always been the one organizing charity drives for families in need. She'd never imagined being on the receiving end. Pride kept her from asking friends for help until it was almost too late. By then, most of them had already decided she was somehow to blame for not knowing about Mike's gambling. As spring arrived, Lisa faced the hardest truth of all. They were going to lose everything. The house, their neighborhood, their old life, it was all slipping away. She had to start preparing the girls for a very different future, one where they might not have their own rooms or their own space at all. Looking back, Lisa would later realize that this was the moment she learned the difference between having a life and just surviving. She was about to discover that sometimes you have to lose everything you think matters before you can find what really does. But in those dark days of early spring, all she could see was the end of the world as they knew it. The foreclosure notice was just the beginning. The real test was still coming, and Lisa had no idea how much stronger she would need to become. The day they lost their house was the worst day of Lisa's life, even worse than the day Mike died. At least when he passed away, people were kind. They brought food and flowers and told her how sorry they were. But when the sheriff came to their door with the eviction papers, the neighbors just watched from their windows like it was some kind of show. Lisa had exactly 4 hours to pack whatever they could fit in their old minivan. Rebecca helped fold clothes while crying quietly. Amy packed her books, trying to decide which ones were most important. Little Sophie didn't understand why they had to leave and kept asking if they could come back tomorrow for her stuffed animals. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Sophie asked for the 10th time as Lisa stuffed dishes into cardboard boxes. "We're going on an adventure," Lisa lied, her voice shaking. She had no idea where they were going. They drove to the Sunset Motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers stopped for the night and people paid by the week when they had nowhere else to go. The room smelled like cigarettes and cleaning supplies. There was one bed, a broken chair, and a television that only got 3 channels. But it was all Lisa could afford with the little money she had left. The girls tried to be brave. They made jokes about camping indoors and took turns sleeping on the floor. Rebecca, always the helper, walked to the ice machine and brought back buckets of ice to keep their few groceries. Cold since the mini fridge didn't work, but living in the motel was harder than any of them expected. The walls were thin, and they could hear everything happening in the other rooms. Fights, loud music, people coming and going at all hours. Lisa barely slept, worried about keeping her daughter safe in a place that felt nothing like home. The girls had to change schools, which was almost as traumatic as losing their house. Their new school was across town, bigger and rougher than the small elementary school they'd attended before. Kids noticed everything different about them. Their cheaper clothes, the way they smelled like the motel's laundry soap, how they never had money for school lunch. Rebecca came home crying one day because someone had called her the poor girl whose dad was a gambler. Amy stopped raising her hand in class, even though she knew all the answers. Sophie started having nightmares and would wake up screaming for her daddy. Lisa tried to stay positive, but finding work was impossible. Every job application asked, for an address, and when she wrote down the motel, employers looked at her differently. Some were polite but said they'd found someone else. Others didn't even bother calling back. Then things got worse. Much worse. Lisa discovered that Mike hadn't just borrowed money from banks. He'd also taken money from Tommy Rodriguez, a man who ran several businesses in town but was known for dealing with people who couldn't get loans anywhere else. Mike owed Tommy $15,000, money that had been due the month he died. Tommy was nothing like the polite bank managers with their suits and legal papers. He was a big man with cold eyes who showed up at the motel one evening with two other men Lisa didn't recognize. The girls were doing homework on the bed when he knocked on their door. "You're Mike Peterson's wife," he said when Lisa opened the door. It wasn't a question. Yes, but Mike passed away. "I'm sure you heard, dead people don't pay debts," Tommy interrupted. "But their families do." Lisa's heart started racing. "I don't have any money. We lost our house. We're living here now." Tommy looked past her at the girls on the bed, then back at Lisa. "That's not my problem. Your husband took my money. I want it back. I can't give you what I don't have," Lisa said. Trying to keep her voice steady, Tommy smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "Everyone has something to give." Lisa tried to close the door, but one of Tommy's friends pushed it back open. The three men came into the room, making the small space feel even smaller. Rebecca grabbed Sophie and Amy, pulling them behind her on the bed. "Please," Lisa whispered. "My daughters are here. Whatever you want to do, don't do it in front of them." Tommy looked around the shabby motel room, at the clothes hanging on the broken chair, at the three scared girls huddled on the bed. He seemed to be thinking about something. "You know what your problem is?" he finally said. "You think you're better than you are. You still act like you're the fancy lady from Oak Street instead of what you really are now." Lisa didn't understand what he meant, but she could see the anger in his eyes growing. "You want to know what happens to people who don't pay me back?" Tommy continued. "I make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of people they are." What happened next would haunt Lisa for the rest of her life. Tommy and his men grabbed Lisa and the girls, forcing them outside into the motel parking lot. Other guests had come out of their rooms, drawn by the commotion. Some had their phones out, recording what was happening. "This is what happens when you don't pay your debts," Tommy announced loudly. "This is what happens when you think you're too good to face the consequences." One of Tommy's men had brought an electric hair clipper. Lisa realized what they were planning to do and started begging, offering to sign papers, promising to find the money somehow. But Tommy wasn't interested in hearing excuses. They held Lisa still while they shaved off all her hair, right there in front of everyone. Her beautiful brown hair that Mike used to run his fingers through fell in clumps on the dirty asphalt. The girls were screaming and crying, but Tommy's men held them back. Then they did the same thing to Rebecca, Amy, and little Sophie. Three little girls who had already lost their father and their home, now losing the last bit of dignity they had left. People were still recording with their phones. Lisa knew that by tomorrow, everyone in town would see what had happened to them. When it was over, Tommy threw $20 on the ground. "That should cover the cleanup," he said. Then he looked at Lisa, her head now completely bald, tears streaming down her face. "You've got 1 week to get out of my town. If I see you here after that, things will get much worse." They left Lisa and her daughter standing in the parking lot surrounded by their own hair while strangers stared and whispered. The motel manager came out and told them they had to leave immediately. He didn't want that kind of trouble at his business. Lisa gathered up their few belongings with shaking hands while the girls cried in the back seat of their van. Rebecca tried to comfort her little sisters, but she was just a 13-year-old girl who'd been through more trauma than most adults. As they drove away from the motel, Lisa looked in the rearview mirror at her three bald daughters, their heads covered with towels and scarves. She had failed them in every possible way. She had no money, no home, no job, and now no dignity. They were completely alone in the world, marked and humiliated, with nowhere left to turn. The cruelest part wasn't just what Tommy had done to them. It was how the other people had watched and done nothing to help. It was how quickly they'd gone. From being respected members of the community to being entertainment for strangers with cameras. Lisa realized that when you fall far enough, people stop seeing you as human. They see you as a lesson, a warning, a story to tell their friends about what happens to people who make bad choices. But Lisa hadn't made any bad choices. She'd just married the wrong man and trusted him too much. Now she and her innocent daughters were paying the price for his secrets, and there seemed to be no end to how far they could fall. The first night sleeping in their van was the longest night of Lisa's life. She parked behind an old gas station that had been closed for years, hoping no one would notice them there. The girls huddled together in the back seat, their heads still, covered with towels and hoodies, trying to stay warm as the temperature dropped. Sophie kept touching her bald head and crying. "When will my hair grow back, Mommy?" she asked over and over. Lisa didn't know what to tell her. Hair would grow back, but the shame and fear might last forever. Rebecca, trying to be brave like always, whispered jokes to her little sisters to keep them from crying too loud. But Lisa could see the fear in her 13-year-old eyes. Amy just stared out the window, not saying anything at all. She'd stopped talking much since they lost the house, and now she seemed to disappear inside. Herself completely. By morning, Lisa realized how unprepared they were for living in a car. They had no way to cook food, nowhere to wash, and the van's heater barely worked. The girls needed to use the bathroom, but the gas station was locked up tight. Lisa drove to a fast food restaurant and bought one small coffee just so they could use their restroom. The woman behind the counter stared at them when they walked in. Even with their heads covered, it was obvious something was wrong. Lisa hurried the girls to the bathroom and tried to clean them up as best she could with paper towels and hand soap. When they came out, Lisa heard the woman on the phone with someone, probably her manager, talking about some homeless people in the restaurant. Lisa bought a small order of French fries with her last few dollars, just so they could sit at a table for a few minutes and feel normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every person who looked at them seemed to know what had happened. Lisa wondered if the videos from the motel parking lot were already spreading around town. In a small place like theirs, bad news traveled fast. They spent the day driving around, trying to figure out what to do next. Lisa stopped at the social services office, but there was a waiting list for emergency housing. The woman at the desk was nice but honest. It could be weeks before they had a spot in a shelter. "What about your family?" the social worker asked. "Isn't there anyone who can help?" Lisa explained about Mike's brother in California who couldn't afford to help. She mentioned a few distant cousins she hadn't talked to in years. The social worker wrote down some phone numbers for food banks and clothing donations, but Lisa could see in her eyes that she'd heard stories like this before. "The hardest part," the woman said quietly, "is that you have children. Family shelters fill up fast, and most places can't take a mother with 3 kids without weeks of paperwork." Lisa felt like she was drowning in red tape and waiting lists while her daughters got hungrier and more scared every hour. They tried sleeping in the van again that night, this time in a different location. Lisa found a spot behind a 24-hour laundromat, where there were lights and people around, thinking it might be safer. But around midnight, a security guard knocked on the window and told them they couldn't stay there. "Look, lady," he said, not unkindly, "I feel bad for you, but if my boss sees you here, I'll lose my job." So they drove around until they found another empty parking lot, this one behind a closed shopping center. The girls barely slept, jumping at every sound. Lisa didn't sleep at all, watching the mirrors and listening for any sign of danger. By the third day, they were running out of gas and had no money left for food. Lisa swallowed what was left of her pride and called Janet, who had been her closest friend when they lived on Oak Street. Janet had helped organize Mike's funeral and promised to stay in touch. "Lisa?" Janet sounded surprised to hear from her. "How are you doing?" Lisa explained their situation, trying not to sound too desperate. She asked if they could stay for just a few days. Until she figured things out, there was a long pause on the other end of the phone. "Oh, Lisa," Janet finally said. "I wish I could help, but Bill says we can't get involved. You know how people are talking about what happened with Tommy and everything?" We have our own reputation to think about." Lisa felt like Janet had slapped her through the phone. This was the same woman who used to cry watching sad movies together, who had borrowed Lisa's car when hers was in the shop, who had eaten dinner at their table dozens of times. "Janet, please," Lisa whispered. "My girls haven't eaten since yesterday." "I'm sorry," Janet said, and she did sound sorry. "Maybe try calling the church. They have programs for people in your situation." People in your situation. That's what Lisa had become. A situation, a problem, something to be handled by programs and organizations. Instead of help by friends, Lisa did call the church where she'd volunteered for years. Pastor Williams was kind but explained that their emergency fund was already stretched thin. He could give them grocery store gift cards worth $50, but the church didn't have facilities for housing families. "Have you considered contacting your husband's employer?" he suggested. Sometimes companies have employee assistance programs even after someone passes away. Lisa had already tried that weeks ago. Mike's insurance company had been polite but clear. Their responsibility ended when they paid out his life insurance policy. The gift cards helped them buy some food, but $50 didn't go far when you were feeding 4 people and had no way to cook anything. They lived on bread, peanut butter, bananas, and whatever else they could eat without heating up. The worst part was watching what the situation was doing to her daughters. Rebecca was losing weight and developing dark circles under her eyes from worry and poor sleep. Amy had stopped doing anything that resembled schoolwork, not that they had anywhere stable for her to study anyway. Sophie was having accidents because she was 2. Scared to ask strangers to use their bathrooms. Lisa started seriously considering something she'd never thought possible: giving up her daughters. Not because she didn't love them, but because she loved them too much to watch them suffer. Maybe foster care would be better than this. Maybe other families could give them the stability and safety she couldn't provide. But every time she thought about it, she imagined Sophie crying for her mommy, or Rebecca trying to take care of her little sisters in some stranger's house. She imagined Amy, who was already so quiet and withdrawn, disappearing completely without her family around her. On their 5th night in the van, it rained. Not just a light shower, but a heavy, cold rain that found every crack in the old vehicle. Water dripped on them all night, and by morning their clothes and blankets were soaked. The girls were shivering and sniffling, and Lisa knew they were all getting sick. She tried to start the van to run the heater, but the engine just clicked. The battery was dead, probably from running the heat too much without driving anywhere. Lisa sat behind the wheel, looking at her 3 sick daughters in the rearview mirror, and finally understood what it meant to hit rock bottom. They were cold, hungry, sick, and now stranded. Lisa had exactly $3.27. In her purse, no one in town would help them. The social services waiting list stretched on for weeks. Their hair was slowly growing back, but the shame of what had happened to them felt permanent. For the first time since Mike died, Lisa let herself really cry. Not the quiet tears she'd been hiding from the girls, but deep, desperate sobs that came from somewhere dark inside her chest. She'd tried so hard to be strong, to figure things out, to protect her daughters. But she'd failed at everything. Rebecca reached between the seats and touched her mother's shoulder. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "We'll figure something out." But Lisa didn't see how they could. They were completely alone, invisible to the people who used to care about them, abandoned by the community they'd once belonged to. Winter was coming, and Lisa honestly didn't know if they would survive it. She looked around the empty parking lot, where they'd spent the night, and realized that this might be as far as they could fall. There was nowhere left to go but up, or nowhere left to go at all. Daniel Wong had been walking past the same broken-down van for 3 days now, and each morning it worried him a little more. He took the same route to work every day at 5:30 in the morning, cutting through the old shopping center parking lot because it was faster than taking the main road to the factory. At first, he thought maybe someone's car had broken down and they were waiting for a tow truck. But on the second day, he noticed the windows were fogged up from the inside, which meant people were sleeping in there. On the third day, he saw small handprints on the back window and realized there were children involved. Daniel knew what it felt like to have nowhere to go. 2 years ago, when his wife Helen died from cancer, he'd almost lost everything too. The medical bills had eaten up their savings, and he'd struggled to keep up with the mortgage while taking care of his 8-year-old son, Kevin. If his neighbors hadn't helped with groceries and babysitting, he might have ended up just like whoever was living in that van. Now Daniel worked double shifts at the electronics factory, coming home exhausted every night to make dinner for Kevin and help with homework. It wasn't easy being a single dad, but they were managing. They had a small house, enough food, and Kevin was doing well in school. Daniel often felt grateful for how things had worked out, especially when he saw other people struggling. On Thursday morning, Daniel decided he couldn't just walk by anymore. The van's windows were completely fogged up, and he could hear someone coughing inside. It sounded like a child's cough, the kind that meant they were getting sick. He knocked gently on the driver's side window. After a moment, it rolled down just a crack, and Daniel saw a woman's face. She looked exhausted and scared, with short hair that was growing back unevenly. Behind her, he could see 3 girls huddled under blankets. "I'm sorry to bother you," Daniel said softly. "I'm Daniel. I work at the factory across the street. I've been walking by your car for a few days, and I wanted to make sure you folks are okay." The woman stared at him suspiciously. Daniel didn't blame her. When you're living in your car with kids, every stranger could be dangerous. "We're fine," she said, but her voice cracked a little. "We're just waiting for someone." Daniel nodded, even though they both knew she was lying. "It's supposed to get really cold tonight," he said. "The weather report said maybe down to freezing. That's dangerous in a car, especially with little ones." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to hold them back. "We don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. Daniel's heart broke a little. He thought about Kevin, safe and warm, in their house, probably eating breakfast and getting ready for school. He thought about Helen, who used to volunteer at the homeless shelter every Christmas. She always said that helping people wasn't about whether they deserved it. It was about whether you could live with walking away. "What are your names?" Daniel asked. The woman hesitated, then said, "I'm Lisa. These are my daughters, Rebecca, Amy, and Sophie." "Hi, girls," Daniel said, waving at the children in the back seat. The youngest one, Sophie, waved back shyly. "Listen, Lisa," Daniel said. "I know you don't know me from anyone, and you have every right to be careful. But I have a little boy at home, and I know what it's like to worry about keeping your kids safe. I can't just walk away knowing you're out here in the cold." Lisa was crying now, trying to wipe her eyes without the girls seeing. "I don't have any money," she said. "I can't pay you for anything. I'm not asking for money," Daniel said. "I'm offering help, no strings attached." He explained that he had a small house about 10 minutes away. His son Kevin was at school, and Daniel had about an hour before he needed to leave for work. They could come warm up, maybe have some breakfast, and figure out what to do next. Lisa looked back at her daughters, who were listening to every word. Rebecca nodded encouragingly. Amy was coughing again, a deep cough that sounded worse in the cold air. "Why would you help us?" Lisa asked. "You don't even know us." Daniel thought about how to answer that. 2 years ago, my wife died, he said simply. "People in this town helped us when we needed it. I guess I'm just trying to pass that forward." Something in his voice must have convinced Lisa, because she agreed to follow him home. Daniel had to help her push the van to get it started. The battery was almost dead. He drove slowly so she could keep up with the van's struggling engine. Daniel's house was small but neat, with toys scattered in the living room and children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. It smelled like coffee and breakfast, and Lisa realized how long it had been since she'd been inside a real home. Kevin was still there, eating cereal and watching cartoons before school. He was a thin boy with his father's kind eyes and his mother's smile in an old photo on the mantel. "Kevin, these are our guests," Daniel explained. "Lisa and her daughters are going through a tough time, so we're going to help them out." Kevin looked at the 3 girls with their unevenly growing hair and shy expressions. "Do Do you want to watch cartoons? He asked Sophie, scooting over on the couch to make room. While the children settled in front of the television, Daniel made pancakes and eggs for everyone. Lisa tried to help, but he insisted she sit down and rest. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. When did you last eat? Daniel asked quietly as he set plates in front of the girls. Yesterday morning, Lisa admitted. We had some bread and peanut butter. Daniel didn't say anything, but Lisa saw him put extra food on all their plates. The girls ate like they were starving, which they almost were. Sophie got syrup all over her face and giggled when Kevin showed her how to cut her pancakes into funny shapes. After breakfast, Daniel had to leave for work, but he did something that shocked Lisa completely. He gave her a key to his house. I'll be back around 6 tonight, he said. Kevin gets out of school at 3, and he knows to come straight home. You can stay here during the day, get some rest, maybe take showers. There's food in the kitchen, help yourselves to whatever you need. Lisa stared at the key in her hand. You're giving us your house key? What if we rob you? What if we're not here when you get back? Daniel smiled. Then I guess I'll have learned something about trusting people. But I don't think that's going to happen. After Daniel left for work and Kevin left for school, Lisa and her daughters were alone in someone else's house for the first time in weeks. The girls explored cautiously, amazed by normal things like working lights and heat that came from vents in the walls. Mom, can we really take showers? Rebecca asked, touching her short, uneven hair. Lisa nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. They took turns in Daniel's small bathroom, using his soap and shampoo, washing off days of fear and dirt and shame. Lisa cried in the shower, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief instead of despair. When Kevin came home from school, he found Sophie coloring in one of his old coloring books while Amy read to her from a picture book. Rebecca was helping Lisa figure out the washing machine so they could clean their clothes. Did you have a good day? Kevin asked Sophie like having strange children in his house was perfectly normal. Sophie nodded happily. Your dad makes really good pancakes, she said. That evening, when Daniel came home from work, he found his house full of the sounds he'd missed since Helen died. Children laughing, the television on, dinner cooking. Lisa had made spaghetti with what she found in his kitchen, and Kevin was showing Amy how to play a video game. I hope this is okay, Lisa said nervously. I tried to cook something to say thank you. Daniel looked around at his house, which felt more alive than it had in 2 years. It's more than okay, he said. It's perfect. That night, Lisa and her daughter slept on Daniel's couch and floor, but they were warm and safe for the first time in over a week. Lisa lay awake listening to her daughters breathing peacefully, hardly daring to believe that there were still good people in the world. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But for tonight, they were home. What started as one night of shelter turned into something neither Lisa nor Daniel had expected. The next morning, Daniel made breakfast again, and Lisa noticed how much Kevin smiled when Sophie giggled at his silly faces. The house felt different. With more people in it, warmer somehow, more alive. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, Lisa told Daniel as he was getting ready for work. We should probably figure out somewhere else to go. Daniel looked at his son, who was helping Amy tie her shoes, and at Rebecca, who was quietly washing the breakfast dishes without being asked. Where would you go? He asked gently. Lisa didn't have an answer. The homeless shelter still had a waiting list. Their van barely ran. She had no money and no job. The truth was, there was nowhere else to go. Stay another day, Daniel said. Let's just take this one day at a time. One day became a week. Daniel moved some boxes out of his small spare room and set up makeshift beds for the girls. Lisa insisted on cooking and cleaning to earn their keep, and for the first time since Mike died, she felt useful again. The arrangement worked better than anyone had imagined. Kevin, who had been quiet and sad since his mother died, suddenly had 3 big sisters who played games with him and helped with his homework. Rebecca found her protective instincts had someone else to focus on besides her own sisters. Amy discovered that Kevin loved the same books she did, and they would read together for hours. Sophie, who had been having nightmares every night in the van, started sleeping peacefully again. She would crawl into bed with Lisa each morning and whisper, "I like it here, Mommy. It feels safe." Daniel came home from work each evening to find his house full of activity. Lisa would have dinner ready, the children would be doing homework together at the kitchen table, and there would be clean laundry folded on his bed. But more than that, there would be laughter and conversation and the feeling that his house was a home again, 3 weeks into their stay. Daniel came home to find Lisa crying at the kitchen table. The children were playing outside, and she was staring at a letter in her hands. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, sitting down beside her. "I got a job interview," Lisa said, wiping her eyes. "At the grocery store downtown. It's just part-time, minimum wage, but it's something." Daniel smiled. "That's great news. Why are you crying?" "Because if I get the job, we'll have to leave," Lisa said. "I'll be able to afford a small apartment eventually, and you've done so much for us already. We can't stay here forever." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Over the past few weeks, he'd watched his son become happier than he'd been since Helen died. He'd watched Lisa's daughter slowly start to smile and laugh again. And he'd watched Lisa herself transform from a broken, desperate woman into someone who sang while she cooked dinner and told bedtime stories that made all the children giggle. "What if you didn't have to leave?" Daniel asked quietly. Lisa looked at him in confusion. "I don't understand. What if this could be permanent?" Daniel said, "What if we became a real family?" Lisa stared at him. "Daniel, you don't mean that. You barely know us. We've only been here 3 weeks. "I know that Kevin laughs more than he has in 2 years, Daniel said. "I know that you make the best spaghetti I've ever tasted, and you remember to pack his lunch with a note inside, just like his mom used to do. I know that Rebecca reads to him every night, and Amy helps him with his math homework better than I ever could." Lisa's eyes filled with tears again. "But people will talk. They'll say you're crazy for marrying a woman whose husband owed money to dangerous people. They'll say I'm using you." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Let them talk. Helen used to say that the people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter." Over the next few months, Lisa did get the job at the grocery store. But instead of saving money to move out, she saved money for other things. New clothes for the children, a birthday cake for Kevin, small improvements to Daniel's house that was becoming their house. The transformation was gradual but beautiful. Lisa's hair grew back, longer and curlier than before. The girls started bringing friends home from school, and the house was often full of children's voices. Rebecca joined the drama club and got the lead in the school play. Amy won a reading contest and proudly displayed her certificate on the refrigerator. Sophie started kindergarten and came home every day with new drawings to show Daniel. Daniel and Lisa were married on a Saturday morning in Daniel's backyard, surrounded by their 4 children and a few close friends. Lisa wore a simple white dress that Rebecca had helped her pick out. Daniel wore his best suit and cried when he saw her walking toward him. Kevin was the ring bearer, grinning as he carried the rings on a small pillow that Amy had decorated with fabric markers. Rebecca and Amy were Lisa's bridesmaids, and Sophie scattered flower petals on the grass with serious concentration. The pastor who married them was the same one who had officiated at Helen's funeral 2 years earlier. He spoke about second chances, and how love can grow in the most unexpected places. He talked about how families aren't always made by blood, but sometimes by choice and circumstance and the courage to open your heart to people who need it. After the ceremony, they had a potluck dinner with their neighbors. Even some of the people who had turned their backs on Lisa when she was homeless came to congratulate them. She was gracious to everyone, but Daniel could see that she remembered who had helped and who had looked away. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Lisa and Daniel sat on their back porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the summer air. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't walked by that parking lot?" Lisa asked. Daniel squeezed her hand. "I try not to think about it," he said. "It scares me too much. I was ready to give up," Lisa admitted. "The morning you found us, I was thinking about calling social services and giving them my girls. I thought they'd be better off without me." "But you didn't give up," Daniel said. You held on long enough for help to come. Lisa looked through the window at their 4 children sleeping peacefully in their beds. Rebecca had her own room now, decorated with posters of her favorite singers. Amy and Sophie shared the spare room, which they'd painted purple with stars on the ceiling. Kevin's room had new curtains that Lisa had sewn herself. You know what the strangest part is? Lisa said, I'm happier now than I ever was before. Even when Mike was alive and we had money in the big house, I wasn't this happy. Daniel understood what she meant. His life with Helen had been good, but it had been quiet and predictable. This life was messier and louder and more complicated, but it was also more joyful. Every day brought something new, a school project to help with, a scraped knee to bandage, a bedtime story to read, a problem to solve together. 6 months after the wedding, Tommy Rodriguez was arrested for running an illegal gambling operation. Lisa read about it in the newspaper and felt a strange kind of peace. The man who had humiliated her and her daughters was finally facing consequences for his actions. But more importantly, his arrest couldn't hurt her anymore. She had Daniel now, and their children, and a community that accepted them as a family. The girls started calling Daniel Dad without anyone asking them to. Kevin started calling Lisa Mom in the same natural way. When people asked about their blended family, the parents would just smile and say they were lucky to have found each other when they all needed it most. Years later, when Rebecca graduated from high school as valedictorian, she would give a speech about how families are made by love, not just by birth. She would talk about how sometimes the worst things that happen to you can lead to the best things. If you're brave enough to keep going, Amy would become a social worker, inspired by her own experience with homelessness to help other families. In crisis, Sophie would grow up to be a teacher, patient and kind with children who came to school hungry or scared or different. Kevin would always remember that his family got bigger and better after his mom died, not because his dad remarried, but because they opened their hearts to people who needed them. He would teach his own children someday that helping others isn't just about being nice. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, and that anyone's story could become our story with just a few wrong turns. But on that summer evening, sitting on the porch swing with fireflies dancing around them, Lisa and Daniel didn't know about all the good things that were still to come. They just knew that they had found each other in the darkest possible circumstances, and that somehow, impossibly, they had built something beautiful together. Their hair had grown back. Their hearts had healed. Their family was complete.